Good morning. Today we're going to begin looking at the book of Jonah. This is a very popular book with lots of folks, but I'm not so sure that everybody remembers a lot about the book. A few years ago, I was watching one of the old talk shows at late at night, I think it was Jay Leno, and he was doing an interview with people about, different subjects, and he was talking about what people know about the Bible. And he asked these young people, he said, what was the name of the person in the Bible that got swallowed by the whale? And they said, Pinocchio. Somebody said once, don't know if it's a whale of a tail or a tail of a whale. But the truth is, the story of the great fish is only like 2 verses in the whole book. But that's what people remember. There's 48 verses, and they're not very long, 4 chapters. We're going to go through every verse. I have got in my office a stack of commentaries on the book of Jonah. Even though it's only 48 verses, there's a lot in it. Things that you may never have thought of that other people have discovered. There's layers and layers of what we can learn from it. Today we're going to start in chapter 1. Title of my message is When God Says Go. God said go to Jonah, but he didn't respond very well. It begins with him being called. In chapter 1, verse 1, Jonah has a call from God. It says, the word of the Lord, verse 1, chapter 1, came to Jonah, son of Amittai, and his call was this: go to the great city of Nineveh, preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So in what we know about this already, who was Jonah, you may ask? Well, Jonah is only listed one other place in the Bible. It's in 2 Kings chapter 14, where it tells us a little bit about who Jonah was. It was during the reign of one of the bad kings of Israel. The king was speaking here in 2 Kings chapter 14. It says, he was the one who restored the boundaries of Israel from Labo-Hamath to the Dead Sea in accordance with the word of the Lord. The God of Israel spoke through his servant Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. Gath-Hepher was a very small town. In their culture, not many people knew where it was. Jonah was not that famous a prophet. We know from the meaning of his name is dove. Jonah means dove, son of faithfulness. You might ask, well, why is that important that Jonah was a dove? Well, in their culture, the dove was kind of like we think of pigeons, a very gentle creature that would come back, love to come home. Remember the story of Noah when they were trying to find dry land. And one of the things Noah did is let go a dove. And the dove came back with some twigs that let them know that the water had receded. And Jonah was a man who loved to be a homebody. He didn't like to go on trips. He didn't like to go out of town. He didn't like to go places. And so his name fit him. In Psalm 55, we're told the story of what a dove is like. The psalmist says, my heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of what? A dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest of storm. So Jonah was area known as the Holy Land in the country, in a small town, that where he lived his life. But Jonah has a connection with Jesus. Several times in the New Testament, Jesus said, the only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah. I wonder how much the story of Jonah impacted Jesus as a young person growing up. Because if you look on this map, you'll see that Nazareth is only about a mile away from the place where Jonah lived. In fact, there was a tomb for Jonah in this town. It was a common story that the Jews told over and over again, the story of Jonah. Jesus must have been very familiar with Jonah and what happened to him. In fact, for the Jews, their most holy day, our most holy days are like Christmas and Easter. The most holy day is Yom Kippur. And during the holiday of Yom Kippur, the book of Jonah is read. And you might ask, well, why do they read Yom Kippur? Well, on Yom Kippur, nobody eats. That's why it's not a popular holiday for Baptists. Nobody eats and nobody drinks anything. You don't wish somebody happy Yom Kippur because it was a day of atonement is what it means, and people reflect on the sin in their lives and how God forgives them. And so they read the book of Jonah because the book of Jonah is about how Jonah was reluctant to go and preach to these people to repent. And it's about repentance. And sometimes we're reluctant to go to God and ask for forgiveness, but we need to. So Jonah gets this call to go to the Assyrians. Now, Assyria, before we judge him too harshly, Assyria was a terrible country. They have inscriptions of some of the torture that Assyrians did to people. I'm not going to go into the detail, but it was terrible what they would do to their people that they conquered. And so for Jonah to go and preach to the Assyrians would be like a Jewish rabbi going to Berlin at World War II and preaching to the people who were Germans that were, the stormtroopers. That would be foolish. Because you knew that at the best you would be arrested and ridiculed, probably not very successful. And there was a prophecy that Jonah was aware of, I'm sure, that God will destroy the city of Nineveh. And so he's thinking, why should I go there? God's going to destroy it anyway. And so he hears this, and he does not respond. He doesn't even argue with God. He didn't say anything. God says, go to Nineveh. We don't know how he said it, if it was a dream, if it was written out, but Jonah heard it. Jonah doesn't respond. Imagine if you were at a wedding, okay, and at the critical moment when the bride is asked, will you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? And she says, nothing. Crickets. And then she runs off. We would be uncomfortable with that. This is what happened here. Jonah does not argue with God. He didn't say, I don't want to go. He said, that doesn't make sense. He just runs away. And he is a reluctant prophet. In fact, if you compare him with Jesus, Jesus was a trailblazer who walked by faith in God. Jonah was a homing pigeon. Jonah's instincts were to run away, go to sleep, hide, to be comfortable, to be in his familiar world. If he had a front door, Jonah's door would have a sign on it that said, do not disturb. Verse 3, Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa. Now, a great do it. He would say, he went down the ship. Down, it was like it reverberated. Everybody say down, down. He had several syllables in it, down to Joppa. And it's appropriate actually because you see the story itself uses repetition to impress on people what is going on here. Jonah did go down from where he lived in Gath Hepher to this port city in Joppa. There, he just happened to find this ship that was going to go to Spain, and so he gets on board, kind of on the last minute. Some commentators believe that he probably paid for the whole ship. He paid the fare. He got on board. You know, Joppa was not a town that was a Jewish town, so he ran off from the people that knew him. He went to this town like, I don't know, Las Vegas, where there weren't many believers. He found this ship at night, paid for it, got on board, and he's thinking, no more profiting for me. I'm going to go and I'm going to fish. I'm going to live there in Spain, you know, relax. And that's his plan. You got a map here that shows where Nineveh was. It was the opposite direction. He went down to Joppa, got into the ship, and was going to Spain when he should have been going to Nineveh. I got another map here. It shows the route that he took. We don't know how far out. He went on the way to Spain, probably not very far, when the storm hit. And make no mistake, God was the one that sent the storm. This wasn't just a meteorological, random event. God sent the storm. In fact, the word for sent in verse 4, the Lord sent a great storm, is hurled. If you've been through a hurricane, you know what a hurled on hurricane feels like. It was hurled on him. That word is repeated. It says, the storm arose, a ship threatened to break up, and they hurled it out of the cargo, out of the ship. It says they hurled Jonah into the water later on. So that is repetition of the hurl. Jonah, by the way, is the man of God. In the middle of a crisis, you'd think he would step up and he would be there for all the other sailors who were in danger of dying. What does Jonah do? Jonah, the man of God, goes down in the ship. First, can't let it go. It's more than that, and I'll show you what I mean. It says, verse 5, all the sailors were afraid. Each cried out to his own God. Jonah's not crying out to God. Jonah's not even talking to God. He's running from God. They hurled the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. Jonah gone down below, lay down, and fell into what here it's calling a deep sleep. That word in the original language is tardema. Tardema. Now, what is that? When Adam fell asleep in the Garden of Eden, the Bible says it uses the same word. God sent on Adam a tardema. He went to sleep, and that's when he pulled the rib out of Adam and made Eve. Later on, there's several times in the Bible. There's one time when Abraham is wondering what he should do, and God reveals to Abraham in a tardema, a deep sleep, that he is going to be committed to the children of Israel. There's a story of David and Saul, and they're at war with each other, and Saul has got these bodyguards that are going to kill David, but God sends a tardema on the bodyguards. So this wasn't just Jonah being depressed and taking a nap. God sent this on Jonah. He's down in the bottom of the ship. He goes into this deep sleep, but the sailors, they're responding. The sailors make out a lot better than Jonah. It says the captain goes to everybody, and he finally says, well, what about the other guy that came on and bought the ship? And he goes to Jonah and says, how can you sleep, Jonah? Get up, call on your God. Maybe he'll take notice of us so that we won't perish. And the sailors said to each other, come on, let's cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. Now, when I heard this, I always thought it was like taking the short straw, a bunch of straws. But the way they usually cast lots is they had little pieces of wood, and they would write everybody's name on the ship. Might have been about 15, 16 people on the ship. They write everybody's name on each piece of wood. Then they would kind of throw the pieces of wood, mix them up in a hat, and draw out the lot. And I thought about doing that today and using popsicle sticks. But I was afraid somebody might get upset if I pulled their name. But they pulled the stick out, and on the stick says Jonah. And so they go to Jonah, and they ask him, tell us. They don't really know who he is. Who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? Because this is a storm. It's not a normal storm. This is something they hadn't seen before. And they believed very much that often storms would be caused by God or gods in their thinking. And they ask him these questions. What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? Very reasonable questions. They don't know. Jonah said something. He wakes up and the prophet speaks. And so what does he say? Well, he says, I am a Hebrew. By saying that, he's saying more than he's just Jewish. He's saying, I am a follower of Yahweh. That was kind of like us saying, I'm a committed Christian. I'm just not, halfway. I'm a Hebrew. Once Paul said, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews, because that meant that you are really a follower of Yahweh. I worship the Lord. The word here for Lord is the tetragrammaton, four-letter word, Yahweh. It didn't have vowels in it. We put those in it. Whenever they saw this word in the Bible, they would translate it Adonai, because the word YHWH, and whenever you see it in English, whenever you see the word Lord capitalized in the Old Testament, that means it is YHWH. It's the holy name of God that you can't even speak. He says, I worship Adonai, the God of heaven, who made the sea, who made the dry land. Now, they had heard of the people of Israel. They had heard of Yahweh, and they knew this is a powerful God. And this terrified them. And they asked, well, what did you do to cause this storm? Because they knew he was running away because he'd already told them so. And the sea was getting rougher and rougher. Any of y'all ever been in a ship or a boat in the middle of a storm? Was it fun? Heck no, it wasn't fun. It was scary, and it's getting rougher and rougher. And so they asked him, what should we do with you to make this sea stop? Because we're going to die. Jonah, who is a little bit like Jesus here, he's going to give his life for him. He says, pick me up and hurl me into the sea, and it will become calm. Now, I often wondered, why didn't he just jump over? Why didn't he just do it? Why did he have to have somebody? He was scared to death. The sailors respond. God sends grace on people who are not even his followers. Don't understand. God can do that. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land. So instead of throwing him overboard, they thought, well, let's just get him off the boat. If we kill him, we may get punished for it. So let's just get him off the boat. So everybody gets an oar. They start rowing harder. The sea grew even worse, wilder than before. And so it was so bad. The boat is rocking so bad. It's taking on water. They're going to die. So they said, please, they're talking to Yahweh, please do not let us die for this man, taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you pleased. You made the storm. And they took Jonah. They hurled him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. I read a portion in the Mishnah, which is a commentary on the Jewish Old Testament. And one person put it this way: they grabbed a hold of Jonah's arms and they first put his feet only in the water and everything got calm. And then they pulled him up and it got rough again. And they did that a couple of times and figured that, well, they just had to throw him in. They threw him in the whole way. The sea grew calm, and what did the men do? They greatly respected and feared the Lord. This was a miracle. Storms just don't get calm immediately. And it happened. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. I don't know what they made vows about. Maybe that they would follow him. Maybe that they would tell others what God did. That's chapter 1. So what's some of the basic things we can get out of chapter 1? Well, first, you can always find a ship headed for Tarshish. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're doing something and you know, this is probably not healthy for me, but I'm doing it. Let's say you have a problem. Let's say you're smoking, or you're drinking too much, or you're eating too much. There's always going to be somebody who's going to offer you what you know you don't need. There's going to be somebody that says, hey, you want a donut? Come on now. I just got it at Duck Donuts. It's still hot. You can just have one. If you are trying to follow the Lord, don't think it's always going to be easy. There's always somebody that's going to offer you something. You can always find a ship headed for Tarshish. Jonah may have even thought, well, this is perfect. This ship is going where I want it to go. I got it, last minute ticket. I'm on my way. Everything is fine. That doesn't mean everything is fine. Just because you got on doesn't mean disobeying is the right thing to do. Second, every sin has a storm attached to it. So what do you mean by that? Well, often when you start out with a sin, you like it. It feels good. Maybe it's you got a problem with your temper and you like blowing up. It makes you feel better. Maybe you got a problem with using something that you drinking or whatever it might be. At first, it feels good to do that. But believe me, every sin has got a storm attached to it. You might not immediately feel the bad effect, but it's kind of like a lethal dose of radioactive material. It's not like getting stabbed with a sword or shot with a bullet. You don't even feel it at first. But over time, this makes you sick. And in the middle of his running from God, God sent a storm. And the storm was to actually help Jonah. Because the third thing is, which is the truth, is that the storm can cause you to change direction. Sometimes in churches, we teach people, if you follow the Lord, you're never going to have any storms. Everything is going to be great, and you're going to be a blessing. You're going to have blessings, maybe. Sometimes, though, even when you're following God, if you're not doing exactly what He wants you to do, and you get off base and you think nobody's paying attention, nobody knows, nobody sees me doing this. I can act one way on Saturday night than I do on Sunday. Nobody sees. God sees. God may send a storm attached to whatever you're doing, and it will affect you. And you say, well, God doesn't want to hurt us. I don't know. Sometimes God will allow us to go through things. I heard an old story about the man who was it's a kind of a fairy tale, and the man was in the middle of a forest, and he came upon this house, and he was a wayfaring stranger, and the house was run by a wicked witch. And she had a servant girl, and he went there, and the wicked witch fixed him a big meal. And she had a trick on him that if he went to sleep and slept all night after eating the meal, he would turn to stone. And he doesn't know this, but the servant girl knows it, and she kind of falls in love with the man. And so she does some things to make to sleep uncomfortable for him in his bed. She puts a bunch of sticks and stones and thorns and nasty things in his bed. So when he goes to sleep at night, she keeps doing things to him, poking him so he won't sleep. And so all night he has a terrible night's sleep. He wakes up the next day and he's still alive. Little does he know that painful night's sleep was a good thing for him. Sometimes God puts something in your life that you don't like, that you don't want, to wake you up because he loves you. He wants you to change directions. Jonah hurled into the sea. But that's not the end of the story, because there is love under the waves.